Types of stress. Imagine being a rabbit that's just been spotted by a fox whose eyes say breakfast. The rabbit will experience stress, which is good because it will be the only hope the rabbit has. With the surge of fight or flight hormones suddenly coursing through his veins, the rabbit takes off. The fox, in a similar physiological state, in hot pursuit. This is acute stress. In that rush of energy, the rabbit's fate is decided. If the rabbit escapes, he probably has a good rest, and then the episode is closed. He won't dream about foxes for a week, or go see a psychiatrist for tranquilizers, or join a Fox Haters Anonymous group. He just goes on being a rabbit, and anyway, if he dwells on yesterday's fox, he's going to miss today's fox, and he may not be nearly so lucky again. Now imagine some artificial laboratory. The rabbit is on a treadmill just a whisker away from a fox on another treadmill. All arranged so that the fox can't reach the rabbit, and the rabbit can't get away either. The result? Chronic stress. In addition to defining stress as we did in the last module, it's important to understand the nature of stress in terms of its types. There are two general types of stress, eustress and distress, and there are two types of distress, chronic and acute. The fox and rabbit analogy illustrates chronic and acute distress. Eustress pertains to the definition of the spice of life and is actually considered to be good stress or healthy stress. How is it that stress can actually be good for you? Well, stressors that elicit positive emotions like excitement, happiness, pleasure, enthusiasm, motivation, invigoration, etc. are considered to be positive stress or eustress. All of these emotions technically brings us out of homeostasis, so it's considered stress, but it's a good, healthy stress elicited by good, healthy emotions. Going to college, getting married, having a baby, or interviewing for or starting a job hopefully are examples of eustress for most people. Eustress may also occur when you do something different, break a routine, make a new friend, travel to a new place, or generate some excitement for yourself. Riding a roller coaster or doing something challenging or adventurous may be examples of eustress. It brings you out of emotional and physical homeostasis, but in a good way. Studies show that athletes perform better when they're under some stress, but not too much. Stress can be energizing and helps raise the athlete's alertness, which then helps them perform better during competition. They transfer stress energy into good energy while competing in their sport. One of my favorite quotes is, "The only difference between a diamond and a lump of coal is that the diamond had a little more pressure put on it." I believe that life is about learning, growing, progressing, and developing. How can we transform from a lump of coal to a priceless diamond if we don't ever experience the pressure that allows us to learn and grow and develop and progress? So some stress is good for you. Distress is considered bad stress or unhealthy stress and would fall under the definition of the rate of wear and tear on the mind or body. You feel bad as a result of encountering a stressful situation, and you might even experience physical problems such as stomach ache, headache, acne, hives, etc. as a result of the stressor. It's stress that wears you down and causes you to feel any of the negative stressful emotions, frustrated, anxious, angry, or overwhelmed. Examples of distressors are having to give a presentation when you absolutely hate speaking to a large group of people, losing a loved one, or being in an abusive relationship. It brings you out of emotional and physical homeostasis, but in a bad way. When people hear the term stress, it's usually distress to which they're referring, not eustress. Take a look at some distressors provided by former students. Can you relate to any of these? Are these distressors or eustressors for you? It's important to note that the very same stressors that cause eustress in one person can cause distress in another. Whether or not the stressor is eustressful or distressful depends entirely upon the individual's perception. Perception is key. For example, divorce is usually considered to be a stressor, but depending on one's perception, this could be a good thing, eustressful, or a bad thing, distressful. For one person, divorce can feel like the end of the world, their life is over. For another person, hallelujah, their life is just beginning. We had a family friend who took his life after his wife divorced him. But I have another friend who got into great shape and started tons of hobbies such as skydiving after her divorce. She felt that her life began after her divorce. Very different perceptions and outcomes, and yet it's the same stressor. It's the same stressor or situation, but it results in very different reactions based on the individual's perception. Here's another example. A former student of mine received a D in my class and was ecstatic because he passed the class, while another student enrolled in the same class received an A-, but was extremely upset and agitated that she didn't receive an A. Again, perception is a key factor in determining whether something is eustressful or distressful. Take a look at some eustressors from others. Notice that some of these things are the same things that were on the distressor list just a minute ago. Again, what is eustressful for one person might be distressful for another, and vice versa. It's possible for stressors that once caused eustress to eventually cause distress. So a stressor can switch from being eustressful to being distressful and vice versa. You might learn how to deal with a particular stressor more effectively, and you begin to view the stressor as more of a challenge than a problem. So the stressor that used to be distressful can become eustressful. Or the stressor that used to be eustressful is now weighing you down and gets worse until it turns into distress. Take a look at some examples of eustressors that became distressful or vice versa. It's interesting that physiological responses to distress and eustress are basically the same, but the brain processes the experiences differently. If you won the lottery, that would be eustressful for most people. But you would have a huge increase in your heart rate and blood pressure and so forth after hearing that you won, just as you would if you found out that a friend or loved one was killed, which would most likely be distressful. The physiological reactions are the same, yet one produces positive emotions and the other results in negative emotions. So although the physiological reactions are the same, the psychological reactions can be very different. But despite the physiological reactions being the same in both types of stress, it's interesting to note that health consequences are associated only with distress. As illustrated by the concept of eustress, not all stress is undesirable or unhealthy. Stress becomes undesirable or unhealthy only when our internal defense system begins to break down because of stress-induced perceptions and ineffective coping methods. Stress, specifically chronic distress, is unhealthy, no doubt about it. But is too little stress unhealthy? Is there really such a thing as not having enough stress? In order to increase physical strength, it's necessary to stress the muscles. Lifting weights can stress muscles and cause microscopic tears. These microscopic tears are good because it's the building back up from these tears that result in increased physical strength. So too it is with stress. Experiencing and dealing with stressors can cause microscopic tears in our emotional health and stamina. But learning to recover and build ourselves back from stressful experiences results in increased emotional strength, if you will. But if the muscle is stressed too much or you lift too much weight and too often, your muscles can be torn down too much and your body doesn't have a chance to build back the muscles. In other words, if you lift too much weight and or you don't give your muscles a day off and have enough recovery time between workouts, your muscles don't have time to rebuild themselves before you tear them down again. So too it is with stress. If you're dealing with too much stress and are hit with either numerous stressors or one huge stressor all at once, and you don't have enough of a break between those stressors, you might not have a chance to recover or deal with the stress effectively. And what was eustress may turn into distress and negatively affect your emotional and physical health. On the other hand, if you don't sufficiently stress the muscles or you don't lift enough weight, you won't develop your physical strength. You can work out all you want, but if the weight is too light and it's too easy, you're not doing any good. A muscle that is never stressed or not stressed enough will quickly atrophy or deteriorate, especially after the age of 25. The muscle must be stressed enough to create microscopic tears so that the body can rebuild the muscle, which again will result in increased physical strength. So too it is with stress. The challenges and trials we face serve as the weight we lift in order to strengthen our ability to handle stress, or I guess you could say our emotional strength. If we're never faced with emotional stress, we will never have opportunities to strengthen our coping capabilities and develop the capacity to effectively handle stress. So the next time you encounter a stressful situation, think this is your opportunity to work out and increase your emotional strength. Yerkes-Dodson principle. The muscle analogy illustrates the concept of the Yerkes-Dodson principle, also known as the good stress, bad stress curve. The Yerkes-Dodson principle basically states that too little stress as well as too much stress is unhealthy. In other words, there's an optimal amount of stress that's correlated with an optimal level of both health and performance. Again, studies have shown that athletes perform better when they feel some degree of stress or when they're psyched up to an extent prior to a competition. Their performance is below par when they're not psyched up enough or when they're psyched up too much. It's thought that the same is true for non-athletes. In other words, we perform our daily tasks better when we have some stress in our life. When we wake up each morning, it's actually good to have a to-do list that's not completely empty, but not super full either. Have you noticed that you're not as productive when you have too much time on your hands? On the flip side, have you noticed that you're not as productive when you have too much to do because you feel paralyzed or overwhelmed? So you don't do anything because you don't know where to start. In addition to our productivity or performance in general, our health is affected when we have too little stress, just as it is by having too much stress. In fact, the same health problems associated with having too much stress, believe it or not, can also occur when we don't have enough stress or stimuli in our lives. So there's an optimal level of stress that correlates with an optimal level of performance and health. But what is that optimal amount? Well, we're all different in terms of our ability to handle stress. You know, people who can't handle a lot of stress, they stress out at the drop of a dime. On the flip side, can you think of people you know who never seem to stress about anything? Again, what's optimal stress for one person may be too much or too little for another. Learning to find and maintain that optimal level of stress for yourself throughout your life is critical to leading a healthy, happy, productive life. Types of distress. So eustress is good or healthy stress, and distress is bad or unhealthy stress. As was illustrated by the fox and the rabbit analogy, not all distress is the same. In other words, not all distress is bad or unhealthy to the same extent. As I previously mentioned, there are two types of distress or unhealthy stress, chronic and acute. Acute distress, like the poor rabbit being chased by a fox, is stress that is intense, but it doesn't last very long. Examples of acute distress would be the infamous lights of a police car flashing in your rearview mirror while you're driving, or giving a presentation to a large group of people, Public speaking is a huge stressor for many people. Watching a scary movie, or hearing an unexpected loud noise outside your window in the middle of the night. Each of these situations produce a relatively large increase in your heart rate, breathing, blood pressure, etc., but it doesn't last very long. You get the speeding ticket, and yes, you're bummed about it, but it's over. You feel like you're going to have a heart attack or that you can't breathe during your presentation, but in a few minutes, it's over. Your muscles tighten and you hold your breath during the super scary scene from the movie, but the scene only lasts a few seconds to a couple of minutes. Your heart feels like it jumps into your throat right after you hear the loud bang outside your window, but then you realize your cat knocked over the garbage can. Chronic distress is not as intense, but it lingers for prolonged periods of time. Think of the rabbit continually running away from the fox on the treadmill. Examples of chronic distress would be having a heavy load in one quarter or semester while working full-time, being in a bad relationship, living with chronic pain or illness, being in debt and not knowing how you're going to pay your rent next month. It's stress that doesn't go away very quickly like acute stress. It lasts for days, weeks, months, and sometimes years. So which is the most common type of stress and the most detrimental to our health, chronic or acute? Chronic distress. Even though acute stress is technically more intense, meaning it causes a greater increase in heart rate and blood pressure and so forth, chronic distress lasts longer and tends to be more detrimental to your health. Mankind has spent much of his long history living with episodes of acute stress, but modern life seems much closer to chronic stress. It's just one long traffic jam. The traffic jam syndrome can apply to school, jobs, marriage, bills, and so on. Chronic distress, even if you feel you've gotten used to it, can have long-term consequences on your body and your mind. The supplemental video for this lecture is Chronic Stress Can Damage Your Health. It's just over 5 minutes long and is taken from that TV show, The Doctors. Key points. There are